Hello and welcome to another episode of These Football Times vlog, and we are at part 3 of our Cup Final trilogy. So from the 1987 FA Cup Final between Tottenham and Coventry, we then moved to the 2001, Stephen, yes, UEFA Cup Final, Liverpool Alaves, and then finally we came to Gary, who got to choose the European Cup / Champions League fixture of choice. So that's where we've arrived at. Gary, if you want to introduce us to, I would introduce you guys, but I feel like by now, if people don't know who you are. So Gary, if you want to introduce sort of the game you chose, because you had quite a lot to choose from, to be fair.
Definitely did, and I've gone for one of the. I mean, because of my aged years, I've seen a lot of football matches, but this has got to be one of the most dramatic, ridiculous football games I've ever seen in my life. And given the high state of the competition it was in, it's just an amazing game. So it's basically the second leg of the Champions League semi-final 2012 between Barcelona and Chelsea. So just get a little bit of background to the game before we sort of go into it, so we know where we are. So basically, Chelsea weren't having a great season, scraped through the group stages, only securing their move into the knockout stages by beating Valencia in the last game of the series. Andre Villas-Boas was the manager. They knew Mourinho was, so people were just describing at the time. It'd been on dicey ground throughout the season as Chelsea had been very inconsistent. And the round of 16 games, they were paired with Napoli. And controversially, Villas-Boas decided to leave Ashley Cole and Frank Lampard on the bench for the game in Naples, the first leg in Naples. And despite Chelsea going ahead with an early goal from Mata, their game finished 3-1. And basically, Chelsea were really in trouble, conceding 3 goals in Naples. Before the second leg, Chelsea played at West Bromwich Albion and got beat, and basically it was the end of Villas-Boas. Roberto Di Matteo had been appointed as Villas-Boas' assistant quite early on, as sort of like a link with Chelsea fans to sort of appreciate that there was a still link with the club, and it wasn't sort of like a totally new guy coming in. But the return leg against Naples, Di Matteo selected a far more regular Chelsea team. And it was one of those nights that sort of set off the run to the Champions League. Drogba scored a header quite early from across from Ramirez, and then Terry headed in from the corner early in the second half. And all of a sudden, 3-1 down, Chelsea were 2-0 up, and on their way goals were going through. But then Napoli got a goal back, and then Lampard got a penalty taken into extra time, and Ivanovic scored one of those goals that Martin Tyler rejoices when he can hang on to the last syllable of somebody's name for a long time. It was Ivanovic, Aguero. It was one of those sort of things. So that was the winner. We got through to the quarterfinals, and I remember saying to my son at the time, we were playing with Benfica, and I said, Benfica hadn't lost in a home leg of a European title. I think it's about 2.5 years. Crazy amount of time. And Chelsea went there, and Di Matteo had selected Torres to play ahead of Drogba, which is a bit controversial at the time. But Drogba has this thing. Playing for Chelsea, Torres has this thing about Benfica and Jourdain, their centre half. He sort of bullied him every time he played, and it's happened in the Europa League final 12 months afterwards. But basically, Torres had the ball in the second half, skinned past this guy, crossed it, and Kalou scored. I mean, we were 1-up in the away leg, finished brilliant. I think we're through. Second leg back at Stamford Bridge, Chelsea scored quite early, 2-0 up, and you think you're coasting. Benfica had their skipper sent off in the first half. They're down to 10 men. But Chelsea don't do these things easy. And with about 10 minutes left, Garcia, who went to City afterwards, scored a header from a corner. And all of a sudden, Benfica did 1 goal, and we were in Chelsea were out. And they piled on the pressure, and it was a bit knee-wobble time until a breakaway from a free kick, and Raul Morales won the length of the field and smashed one in to make it safe. The final 4 clubs left in the competition were Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, Barcelona, and Chelsea. And nobody's going to say, if you win it from here, nobody's going to. There's no gimme there. But that's 4 of the 3 of the biggest teams in Europe you're facing. Chelsea drew Barcelona. And in the first leg at Stamford Bridge, Chelsea got absolutely hammered. 71% possession for Barcelona in the game. They couldn't score. But Di Matteo had clocked this situation with Dani Alves, who was playing fullback for Barcelona. And he plays more of like a right winger almost than a fullback. And the space, he was left behind him, but he charged forward. And basically given instructions, he moved Ramirez from his normal place to the right side of the midfield to the left. So he's facing against Dani Alves. And Ramirez he got the pace of like a 200-metre runner. So, I mean, look, it wasn't much quick over 10 yards, but over 50, 60 yards, this guy got pace to burn. And so it was, in this entire contest against Barcelona, Chelsea only scored goals in injury time. There was never any goals inside 45 or 90 minutes. There were always goals in injury time. So we're into a minute and a half of injury time in the first half. And Messi is charging forward again. Barcelona dominating the game. They hit the bar. Missed so many chances. Czechs performing miracles. And Messi's charging forward and tries to nutmeg Lampard. And Lampard gets possession off him. And Drogba, who'd been isolated throughout the entire game, charged down the right flank and drew Puyol and Piqué towards him. And Ramirez, understanding what he was told, head into the space on the left-hand side. Lampard lumped the ball towards him. Total space, and obviously he draws defenders to him. Drogba hangs back a bit, the ball's crossed in, and Drogba hits the ball with his left foot against his right foot, and the ball bobbles towards the goal. Valdez sort of walked over and picked it up. Somehow conspired to let it bounce past him, and we scored. He cannot believe it, we'd had one chance in the game. And basically, for the second half, the situation was repeated. Barcelona went forward. They hit the post twice, I believe. Fabregas missed an open goal. Messi missed chances. And the game only 1-0. And so we go into Barcelona, to the Camp Nou, the best team, probably the best club in the world, with a 1-0 lead that big nicked. And you've got to hold out for 90 minutes. Put that in how works out.
I'm going to come to you in a second, Aidan, because I think we need some context. People know about this Barcelona side, as I was mentioned there, probably at the time, the best side in the world, and certainly an era-defining, in my opinion, era-defining side. It's Guardiola's Barcelona. But before we come to you, Aidan, Stephen, Chelsea of that era, Abramovich is almost become obsessed with the Champions League in terms of, they've already won the Premier League. All of that has been done and taken care of on a relatively regular basis. The shift or the gaze seemed to move towards the Champions League, and it sort of became almost an obsession. And certainly there was, there had been some classic Chelsea Barcelona ties within the Champions League, before then. But I suppose just a little bit about that: Drogba, Terry, Lampard, Cole, Abramovich, the names that are in there, I suppose is part of it. But that era, that Chelsea side, with the always going to win the Champions League, because you can never say that, but was it almost an air of inevitability that they would eventually win the Champions League?
Probably similar to what you could explain Man City now.
Yeah.
There is that sense of this team should be winning this competition. But you watch this air of frustration with a fascination, with each passing year and each blow that is sustained, it becomes harder to come back and to come back again. So yes, there was this, I think, acceptance that it had to happen at some point. Surely it had to happen. They'd had those two semi-finals against Liverpool, come so close, within millimetres in 2005 with Gudjonsson's hit, a penalty shootout in 2007 in the semi-final back at Anfield, 2008 the final, and that slip from Terry. It had been this litany of near misses and pain, basically. But yeah, there'd been this air of almost an air of inevitability, but at the same time, when it came to them winning it, it was the most unexpected season for them to do so. They almost won it in the style of Liverpool doing it in 2005. You know, there was a backs against the wall kind of attitude to it. It was just a sheer stubbornness that got them over the line. Whereas in previous seasons, you know, they were losing games where they probably should have won. They went into them, you know, as the best team. I always remember that night, the semi-final of the second leg in 2005. We were 37 points behind Chelsea in the league. And then, you know, this kind of like ramshackle, you know, patchwork quilt of a side that Liverpool had that saw off this beautifully balanced Chelsea side. Yet by 2012, you know, it's very much a Chelsea side that is trying to find itself. There has been a huge sense of disarray. You know, they've sacked AVB partway through it. You know, Di Matteo's been given the job to see them through to the end of the season, but suddenly things start to click. You know, players certainly seem to be pulling in the same direction, and then there was just something quite compelling about them. So yes, it was a season out of context for them to win it in so many ways. Yet I can understand why they did, and even at the time, it just felt very familiar to me. Having watched Liverpool do something similar in 2005, I could see the similarities as Chelsea kind of like blundered along almost.
It's funny going from the sublime to the ridiculous. Obviously, you know, Aidan, the amount of time, or it seemed to feel like forever that Barcelona at the Camp Nou would just became foregone conclusion. It's Champions League night. Barca were at home, therefore there will be a victory arriving. You know, within the next 90 minutes, there'll be a win for Barca, and life will go on again. And you know, obviously we've seen certainly incredibly recently the demise of Barca that has come, you know, certainly at the hands of Liverpool, you know, now at the hands of Bayern. But obviously back then, you know, this was a superb Barcelona. So, you know, probably, you know, one of the greatest club sides we've ever seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were era defining. They changed the game. I mean, they sort of steered how the Spanish national team ended up dominating as well. At the time of this game, they'd won 2 of the previous 3 Champions Leagues, and they'd done it in sublime style. They'd overrun Man United in both of those finals in epic style. They hardly gave them a kick. And this was this was the final season of Guardiola's reign at Barcelona. His time there was coming to an end. So if anything, they were slightly beyond their loftiest peak. But, you know, that's not really to denigrate too much, because they were so high above most others at that time that even coming off that peak still left them in a great position to beat most teams. And that's exactly what they did many times. It's not just in European nights as well. Of course, in Spanish domestic football, they had some seismic victories that sort of resonated around the world. They beat Real Madrid 5-0 on a memorable occasion. But of course, yes, the Champions League was where they really wanted to forge their reputation and push on, and at the time try to gather a few trophies back on Real Madrid. So yeah, I say they weren't quite at their most the biggest peak at the point of this game, but that's not to say they weren't. They still had, of course, the main characters there, Messi, chief among them, but Xavi, Iniesta, and so on in the midfield, keeping the ball constantly moving. And it was all this quick passing and controlled possession that kind of carved teams open. And when they got close to the penalty area with this quick passing, so aside from the times where it was just retaining possession elsewhere in the field and tiring the opposition out, once it actually got incisive towards the opposition's penalty area, it was lightning quick. The tiki-taka, of course, to coin the phrase, it was so quick and it was so hard to stop. And many a team might have gone into a game with Barcelona with the full intention of, you know, trying to take it to them a little bit or try to play a different way to counter it, and just rendered utterly redundant in the face of this ongoing onslaught at them of controlled possession and quick passing coming their way. And they end up chasing shadows even if that's not how they tried to play, and they tried to do something different. And the game we're talking about followed a lot of that pattern, as did the first leg that Gary's talked about as well. Various incidents in the game contribute towards enhancing that to some extent as well, that we'll come on to. But the way they dominated opposition was just astounding. And yeah, at times some found that less than exciting, that's true. But when it was done at its highest pace and it was getting towards the critical areas of the pitch, it was breathtaking and almost unstoppable.
I'm just going to ask you another quick question. I'm really sorry. Do you think, and to be fair to all three of you, such was Barca's dominance at that time? Do you think that sides who beat Barca to go on and win the Champions League during that era, do you think it almost enhanced the winning of the trophy? I don't know if I've explained that correctly, but if you avoided Barca and won the Champions League and somebody else put Barca out and then they lost in the next round, but if you did as Chelsea did, and obviously they're not the force that they were, but obviously Liverpool did it last year, but do you think that if you were a side that won the Champions League, having defeated Barca, within the knockout stages, it almost validated your victory even more?
Yeah. If you look at the one that they didn't win in between that previous 3 seasons, in 2010, it was Inter Milan won it under Mourinho. But what's the most significant game of that was their semi-final victory over Barcelona. And yeah, so that entirely validates what you're saying there, I think. And in the same case with Chelsea, although possibly the circumstance of the state Chelsea were in after this semi-final and who they had to play and where, and the number of players they were missing probably didn't make them favourites at all to win the final, but they did. And the fact that they'd done it through coming through this incredible semi-final, yes, certainly enhanced it. And I think in Inter Milan's case in 2010, very much so, from a similar sort of smash and grab in a slightly different manner. But it was shown as this is the way to counter that kind of football, and that's where it ended up becoming less entertaining, if you like, because the only proven way to counter it was to soak it up to such an extent with everybody back that it turned the games into one-way traffic, even if the goals didn't end up all coming for that team.
It's interesting to say that in the time Guardiola was at Barcelona, there was only one club that had a winning record, had won more games than they'd lost against Barcelona in the time Guardiola was there, and that was Chelsea. Only one club. And Barcelona had almost got this, inferiority complex isn't the right word, but they'd got a little bit of, they knew that when they played Chelsea, it was going to be a difficult game. And I remember a few years earlier, Mourinho took Chelsea to Barcelona. And he did 2 things at the Camp Nou. Firstly, he made Chelsea play in all white, which wasn't their second strip, but it was deliberate because it was Real Madrid. And before the game started, he walked out onto the pitch himself, stood there looking around, taking all the abuse off the fans. So when the players came out, they knew that he was standing up for them as well. Psychological things like that made such a difference. And in this game, Chelsea also played in all white, although they had a blue and yellow bar across. That was not their change strip either. But Di Matteo took on the tactic that Mourinho deployed earlier.
Obviously, Stephen, before we get into the game, then I guess, Liverpool did it, last season, and, it's not, it wasn't the Barca of sort of, the era that we're talking about here, but, of that time, do you think there's a certain validation comes where, we're from, all of us are from the old European Cup, whereby you just had to beat the best. If you're going to win the tournament, at some point, you've got to beat the best side. The best sides in it. If you could avoid them and still win the European Cup, or the Champions League, does it not invalidate your victory? Because winning the European Cup or Champions League is a great achievement, but you almost had to beat them in order to prove that you were worthy winners.
Winning it, I think it wouldn't take the joy out of it for any supporter if they didn't. But yes, I can fully buy into that. You want to beat the best. Always said as I always prefer it when my team draw a big team, rather than kind of like I don't like the supposed easier options or the weaker group that people will lament other teams drawing. oh, such and such has drawn an easy group again, or all that. I always prefer playing the biggest teams because the players have to rise to the occasion. The fans have to rise to the occasion. There's nothing quite like facing one of the mega names of European football. And when Liverpool did it in 2005, AC Milan were that side. Ancelotti's AC Milan with Kaká, and so on and so forth. But yes, it's exactly the same. To face down that indelible side of the era, it's a wonderful thing.
It's okay. So obviously, Aidan was pitch side at Wembley. Stephen was pitch side for the UEFA Cup. So Gary, it's over to you now. It's a 90-minute. Feel free to talk us through the first half.
Well, let's look at the team first. So basically, Chelsea had another problem because David Luiz rubbed a hamstring. I think it was in the League Cup final against Tottenham, but so he was absent anyway. So one of the centre-backs available from the bench wasn't available. Not very dissimilar from the FA Cup final against Arsenal when we had two players pull hamstrings, and hamstring would play a big part in this game as well. And for Barcelona, Guardiola had sort of wised up to the issue with Dani Alves and had gone with the back three, Mascherano, Piqué and Puyol, and Alves on the bench, although he would come on and play in the game quite early. So the game started and Barcelona attacked Chelsea, and that's pretty well what's happened throughout the game. Perhaps the first major event was about a dozen minutes in, Barcelona were attacking on the left-hand side. Gareth Cahill stretched for a ball, twagged his hamstring, and he had to go, although he tried to play on for a while, he had to go off and was replaced by Bosingwa, who Jamie Redknapp insists on calling boss winger due to drive blooming war, as if he's some kind of guy in charge of all flank players. He's not the boss winger. He's boss. Say his name correctly. Say his name. It's Bosingwa. Anyway, so Bosingwa came on, and Ivanovic moved from right back into the centre of defence. That wasn't the only change they were going to make throughout the game. Chelsea resisted for quite a while, but Barcelona, they just seemed this irrepressible force, and eventually they scored. Strangely enough, it was actually before that they scored. Piqué got injured and he had to go off, and Dani Alves came on. Although it didn't change the system, they still play with a back three. But Dani Alves was playing as part of the back three. And Barcelona scored where Busquets scored. They were playing a guy called Cuenca, who actually went to, I think he went to Betis in the end. But he played on a wide left, and they had a corner, the ball came back out, he played the ball across, and it was a low cross, and there was Busquets with oceans of space at the far post. And within that sort of first, 25, 30 minutes, the lead had gone. So Chelsea were really in trouble. And then, just to make matters worse, Terry decided that it'd be a good idea to stick his knee into the back of Alexis Sanchez. I don't know why, but I remember I was watching the game at the time, and the game stopped, and the referee was walking over. I was thinking, what's going on here? And the slow motion showed, and you think, oh, this is disaster. And Terry's holding his arms up like, I didn't do anything. What? I mean, ridiculous. And eventually it was Cech who actually sort of guided him off the pitch. So now we're in a situation where Luiz didn't start, Cahill's gone off injured, Terry's been sent off. So 3 starting centre-backs are all unavailable. So what we ended up doing is playing, Ivanovic was already playing in the centre defence, but Bosingwa had to come into the centre defence, a full-back, but he's not a particularly big lad. And then they pulled Ramirez back to right back. And with the best with the world, Ramirez is one of these sort of workaholic midfield players, a lot of pace, and he scores his goals, but he's not a fullback. And pretty soon, pass from Messi out wide to Iniesta. Ramirez gets skinned trying to play offside, and the ball's in the back of the net. It's 2-0. And Martin Tyler says, and Chelsea have got a mountain to climb now. 10 men inside the first 30-odd minutes, 2-0 down against the best team in Europe. And you're thinking, I just remember thinking, this is done now. Just don't get embarrassed. Okay, and then so the game goes on a bit. And then we had a couple of... Ramirez gets booked, so he's out to the far if we get that far, which didn't seem to be a particularly important thing. But 1 minute later, another situation where Barcelona were attacking and Lampard gets possession of the ball, and he spins and plays the ball This is into the sort of injury time now. Plays the ball down the right flank. Ramirez gallops forward if they're using his pace from that fullback situation. Skins past Mascherano and Puyol. And as Valdez comes out, this most immaculate Brazilian chick into the far corner. And all of a sudden, you're thinking, what's going on there? And then he spoils the whole thing by trying to do this ridiculous dance. You're Brazilian. Samba, don't do that. Don't do that. But I'll forgive him anything for that moment. And half-time, Chelsea are amazingly winning on away goals. And after the game, Peter Cech said at half-time, Di Matteo had said to them, count it down in 5 minutes. If you keep them out for 5 minutes, they'll go a bit worried. Keep them at 10 minutes, they'll go a bit worried. Keep them out for 15 minutes, they're going to get very worried. And Cech says every minute that passed in that time, we were getting more and more confident. And before we go to the second half, basically what Di Matteo did was, so he was playing a back four, and in front of the four, he played his 3 midfield players, and then both his strikers were playing as almost extra fullbacks. So they were playing a 4-5-0 formation. It invited a lot of trouble. But I'll let the guys talk about that part before we go into the second half.
I mean, there's so much to talk about. I think I'll come back to you again, Aidan, because obviously, you talked about that almost an air of inevitability and how games almost became training exercises at the Camp Nou. Certainly, over a period of time in the Champions League, and there were times when certainly we've all rewatched this game relatively recently, and you're absolutely right. There were times where it was almost as if a scenario had been set up by Guardiola in training, and they'd just gone, there you go play that scenario for sort of 10, 15 minutes. And it felt like a Champions League game, but it didn't look on the screen like a Champions League game, if that makes sense.
No, it's right. And it was a training exercise, and it got increasingly that way. I mean, I guess Chelsea's forays forward, and there were a few in the first half. Drogba was sort of muscling his way through and had a few little scares towards the Barcelona penalty area, but nothing really that would actually threatened to score at that stage. He was just maintaining possession up there for short spells a little bit, possibly to give everyone else just a bit of a breather, really. It became increasingly intense in that one-way traffic, with the way they got themselves a 2-0 lead, and Chelsea, obviously their centre-back pairings, as Gary said, has completely changed their plans. The sending off, it was all falling apart, really. And so it was increasingly backs to the wall and try and cling on and just hope against hope that one chance came the other end. And, when it did, it was remarkably easy. Easy is possibly not the right word, but, it wasn't any... it didn't take that much, it was a couple of quick passes, and next thing Ramirez is clean through. It wasn't huge amounts of build-up play or anything like that, or sustained pressure. It was just tap, 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 and there we go. There's a guy through. It was totally against the run of play. But at the time they were 2-0 down, all it ever would have taken at that point is one goal, and Chelsea were back in the driving seat. So, that threat was always there. Regardless of how much possession is going the other way or not, the danger is always there that one freak instance, one good move, one shot from distance, whatever it would be, could suddenly swing the game the other way. And yeah, there was still a long time to go, and Chelsea were down to 10 men, and they weren't going to see much of the ball for the second half either. I'm sure they knew that, just as much as those of us watching it knew that exactly what would be the case. And because of the circumstances of how they built up, the training exercise element we talk about just became more and more and more that entrenched. Chelsea's attempts to sort of break out became fewer and fewer as it got on. There was a sort of smaller element of that in the first half, and then the second half takes that to extreme levels.
Do you think, Stephen, in terms of, obviously, don't get me wrong, they are ultimate professionals. Guardiola is the ultimate professional. But at 2-0 up, Chelsea down to 10 men, do you think there was not a casualness about Barca? But, Aidan makes a great point that the goal is so simple. It's so simple. The way it just comes from nowhere. And it was almost as if Barcelona had not forgotten that there was still a tie to be played. And, as Aidan rightly said, one goal, you know, one goal would have won it. Would have won it for Chelsea anyway. But you know, do you think there was almost that Barca had almost forgotten that they were actually in a game at this point, based on the scenario that had built up in the sort of previous 40 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, it was almost, you know, Johan Cruyff in essence. You know, this was kind of like the influence of Cruyff almost flooding through here. That sense of that little bit of arrogance almost, that, you know, we're too good for this not to be finished. You know, this was essentially the 1974 World Cup final. You know, the Netherlands score in the very first minute, and for them, you know, that's it, game over. With 89 minutes still to play, and we've only got one goal. You know, this was Chelsea on the ropes. This was Barcelona in ascendancy. Yet, you know, the angles of error were still very narrow. So yeah, for me, it wasn't outright arrogance. They weren't playing with an arrogance. It was kind of like they were assured of themselves, a little too assured of themselves. They were very confident. They were very assured. They weren't arrogant, but you know, arrogance is, you know, the sum total of what it comes out as in the end. You know, Chelsea, that they get that goal back right on the stroke of half time, only a minute after going 2-0 down. You know, this is where Chelsea kind of make Barcelona think. They make them worry. You know, and this continues into the second half.
Just before we go into the second half, to me, is just someone who I'm assuming polarizes. I are interesting defenders in any way, shape, or form. They get in the way of the game, in my opinion. However, John Terry, as a footballer, as a captain, as a person, you know, in moments like that, Gary, I suppose I'll ask you first. Surely, you know, like you said, with David Luiz, with, you know, the problems with Cahill, the moment you needed your captain, and he was a very, very good defender. Don't get me wrong. I'm not, you know, denigrating his greatness as a Premier League defender, but in terms of the big moments, surely you had to feel let down by him.
Well, yes, you have to feel let down because it was stupid. It was unnecessary. I mean, if you get sent off for pulling a guy down when he's clear, at least there's some logic to it. But this was, you know, the ball. I think the ball was quite wide away from the play, and he just ran up and basically planted me in his back. And I don't know the logic. I don't know what's going through his mind at the time. But you know, as a Chelsea fan, and you know, John Terry is a love-hate sort of character. And if you're not a Chelsea fan, you hate him. And if you are a Chelsea fan, you love him and don't care what everybody else thinks. You know, and he did far more things right for Chelsea than he did wrong. But that was just, I don't know, one of these crazy moments of madness is the right word, but I don't know what was going through his head. I don't know what was going through his head.
It is an incredible moment, Aidan. You know, I mean, you know, you watch it. You know, even the commentators at first, you know, don't see what it is, and then you know you cut to the replay. You know, the ball is so far away. The referee is relatively close to the situation, but it just seems like, I don't know. It just seemed like the most bizarre thing to try and do. I mean, I think it's Alexis Sanchez that he does it to, and it's not even like he was the best player. You know, I just don't get it. I suppose it's a little bit not like the Zidane one in the World Cup final, but it just seemed, I don't know where it came from. I don't know where it came from.
Well, I wrote one word down in my notes about that, and it was stupid. It was absolutely stupid, crazy thing to do. And you kind of think, well, this is the guy whose Champions League destiny just isn't going to work out well. You know, a few years earlier, was it 4 years earlier, he had the chance to win it for Chelsea, you know, the man you most associate with the club. He slipped, as we all know, and those of us who don't particularly like John Terry, as Gary says, it's a love-hate, and you know, Chelsea fans absolutely adore the man. He's a great player for Chelsea, and yeah, of course, he's a fantastic player, and a great leader as well, which was part of his great appeal for Chelsea. But you know, he rubbed people up the wrong way, and then when he slipped there, you know, everyone else rejoiced a little bit. I might suggest, but when he went and did this and brought more sort of pain down on himself for this crazy thing to do. You kind of think, well, John Terry in the Champions League, it's just not meant to be, is it? You know, something's just not right in this situation for him. It's never going to quite work out, and maybe he was always destined to miss out on the time when they actually won it through his own stupidity. I mean, he was a really good player. He's the kind of person, like so many other players, that if he's on your team, everyone would want him on their team. You know, he makes your team better. He does, and he inspires the rest. He leads by example mostly, other than situations like this one. He was, he chipped in with all sorts of number of goals with headers from corners, free kicks, and so on. He was, he's the kind of guy you could rely on to be in the right place at the right time. So, as Gary said, it's Chelsea usually got reliability and great service from him. On this occasion, not so much.
Before we go back to you, pitch side, Gary, for the second half, Stephen, I suppose it says something where you can miss a European Cup winning final penalty and get yourself sent off in a semi-final in one of the most critical situations, and yet still come out probably the ultimate legend of a football club.
Yeah, it's that sense of, not even misadventure, is it? It's the red mist coming down. He was the epitome of the thinking of Jose Mourinho out on the pitch. And that's the good and the bad side of it. For me, he wouldn't have been the player he was if he didn't have the temperament he was. People used to say that about Ian Wright as a goal scorer, and that nasty streak almost within him. And the same works for certain defenders, midfielders. And John Terry's the same. If he had a different temperament, if he was told to tone it down, he would never have been as effective as he was. But yeah, fully subscribed to just how ludicrous his actions were in this game. I knew he got sent off. It always stuck in my mind that he got sent off. But the means of his sending off were completely time. And when I come to see it, I thought I had to kind of like go back and watch it 2 or 3 times. So I'd sit and watch the replays. No, he didn't do that. And then it's a bit like how you go, you can walk into a supermarket at the corner shop and, the item of choice that you've come for isn't there, but you'll stare at it, the empty space, for kind of like a little bit too long in the expectation that it will appear magically. And then this was exactly the same thing with John Terry. You're thinking, no, I'm gonna go back, and he didn't do that, and yet he did.
It's interesting, and this isn't something I've ever tested, but I'd be willing to bet if somebody said to John Terry at that time, you can get yourself sent off, but if you do, we can guarantee you Chelsea win the Champions League, he would have got himself sent off.
I get that. Like I say, to me, a player who can recover from those two. I suppose it helped that, whether it would be slightly different had they never gone on and won the Champions League. And as Steve mentioned earlier, Gary, that preordained feeling that surely this team are going to win it. Surely this generation of Chelsea will go on and win it. I suppose the fact that they did win it takes away, had they have lost that game, saying, John Terry's legacy at Chelsea will be any different. I think the big enough character, and certainly his performances and what he did for the club is big enough to overcome that. But I guess winning it probably took the sting out of that particular incident.
It probably did, and also I'm okay. I've got my blue tinted glasses on. Let's not pretend I haven't. But if the way that semi-final finished against Barcelona was also a massive influence in the final as well. That's that belief, that life had painted the picture, as Gary Neville said, the game, it is written in the stars. And after that, the way that game finished, that was become a convincing argument for Chelsea players, no doubt.
Okay, so
anyway.
Well, that was a great halftime chat, guys. Great punditry by all of us. Well done. So back to you then, Gary, for the second half.
Well, things didn't start overly good. 4 minutes into the game, into the restart, first Ivanovic gets booked, which means he's got to miss the final. If we get to the final, miss the next game. I remember afterwards, Jeff Shreves were interviewing the players after the game, and Ivanovic was there, and Ivanovic had been absolute tight in that defence. And Jeff Shreves said to him, "So, Branislav, you're going to miss the final." And he didn't know. Ivanovic didn't know. He said, "Am I? I mean, Jeff, I'd have punched you in the mouth." But anyway, Ivanovic is booked. But obviously the sort of critical thing in the first few minutes was the penalty. Fabregas gets the ball on the left-hand side of the Chelsea defence. Drogba's, as I said earlier, is playing like an auxiliary fullback and lunges into a challenge. And he doesn't touch Fabregas. And the reason I say that's not opinion. Fabregas afterwards said, "No, you never touched me, but I had to go down. This is an important game." And, I can understand that. And if anybody says, "Oh, well, he cheated," you haven't got a player who plays for your team, who dives occasionally, don't tell tough stories. Don't tell story fibs. And so Fabregas goes down and Messi gets a penalty. Now, Messi had played against Chelsea, I'm not sure how many times, but 6 or 7 times by this stage, and had never scored. And Cech said, in my mind, I knew he hadn't scored, and I was determined not to dive early and give him an open shot. So I stood up for a long time, as long as I could. You stand up as long as you can. And he said that, I don't know how true it is, he said that tactic might have confused Messi, and so he actually went to hit the ball straight and high. And he hit the bar, and penalty, Messi misses a penalty, and you're thinking, as much as that deflated Barcelona, it must have massively lifted the Chelsea players as well. And sort of things go on from there, and Barcelona keep pressing, and the team tries to change a bit. He takes Cuenca off and brings Teo on, another wide player, keeps putting the pressure on. Chelsea defend so much. Messi hits the post. Cech saves a couple of great shots. Bosingwa, who gets sort of slighted so much after he left Chelsea, there again, this guy worked his socks off. A small fallback, and as Ivanovic headed the ball, this guy was scurrying around, tied up like some kind of housemaid, with the dustpan and brush tied up behind Ivanovic for everything that didn't get through. And the midfield worked hard, and resisted. Lampard gets booked. To take Fabregas off, and they've been Keita on, and they're trying to change things, and they press, and then, just when you think the pressure's going to get immense and you can't last any longer, ball comes into the box, and one of the shots, and he deflects and hits Cole. So before that, Torres came on the subject for Drogba in the last 10 minutes, and so Torres is playing as like an auxiliary left back. And Barcelona tried to attack down the side. Torres gets the ball, and in his Chelsea form rather than his Liverpool form, tries to dribble past a player, loses possession, he goes to the pitch. And instead of dropping back into the position he's been told to do, he carries on jogging forward. Now, fate is a strange mistress. The ball gets transferred across, somebody's shot, the ball gets deflected, hits Cole on the chest, and Cole basically harpoons the ball down the pitch as far as he can. And all of a sudden, you realise that Fernando Torres hadn't stopped running while jogging, and the ball bounces around the centre circle, and the only guy in the picture is Fernando Torres. Now, Fernando Torres decides now, I'm going to be Liverpool Torres, not Chelsea Torres. And he's galloping clear. And I'm saying, I remember screaming to our Greg, my son, take it to the corner, because you know he's not going to score. And there's a player looms up alongside him. And I think, pass the ball. It's Salomon Kalou. So we've got Torres and Kalou breaking away. And as I say, Torres decides, I'm Liverpool Torres again, and never, ever looks like missing. Kicks it wide, around Valdez, rolls the ball into the back of the onion bag, and I'm in tears. It's a magical goal, and he falls to his knees, and you see the picture on TV. In the background, all the Barca fans are saying, "Oh, well done, Fernando." No, they're not. and Gary Neville is having his orgasm.
I mean, like we say, again, I'll sort of come back to you, Aidan. It's, to me, having watched it again relatively recently, to me, I think Frank Lampard is a great footballer, right up there alongside, probably Steven Gerrard and probably someone else that I can't remember. Sort of the great Premier League era players. And obviously the captain's armband is given to him from John Terry after he's sent off. And when you sort of, when you know the result and you know a game, you sort of start to look at peripherals and, things that you don't, your eye doesn't follow the ball because you kind of know what's happening anyway. And to me, Frank Lampard's performance in that game was a real captain's performance. He was literally at the heart of everything, where I suppose that John Terry would have been. It was almost a seamless transition or it seemed to be a seamless transition of leadership on the pitch in that game.
The two almost came as a pair, though, didn't they? When you think of Chelsea of that era, Terry and Lampard are the sort of the spine that was always there, and they're the ones who, Terry had come all the way through the club. Lampard, not in his youth, but had been there a very long time. They were synonymous with the club, and equally so in terms of leadership. Yeah, Terry may have been the captain, but Lampard was as much of a leader, I would suggest, as Terry, just slightly further forward on the pitch. But yeah, in this game, he obviously had to compensate for the lack of his pal, and made sure he got himself all over the place. I mean, the midfield, such as it was essentially 3 people in front of 6 defenders for large portions of the second half. And as you say, the wide men or strikers were extra fullbacks. And there were times in this where, to me, it resembled, if you ever seen games of handball where, the defence is just around the goal in a semicircle, more or less, and the attacking team in a semicircle on the outside, sort of passing it around, trying to expose a little gap, pull people out of position and so on. And there were times where it was just getting increasingly like that. And Chelsea were completely stuck in defence, but, they didn't have to score now. If, and it's a huge if, at the time they could hold on, then they were through. So they didn't have to do anything other than keep Barcelona out. And I think it became increasingly absorbing, actually, as a contest, even though it was all just in this tiny portion of the pitch, save for Torres' moment at the end, in this tiny portion of the pitch. And, it just became a very absorbing contest of, well, surely they're going to get through. Surely they're going to get through. Hold on, actually, they're running out of ideas here. The longer it goes on, the less likely it seemed, until I guess maybe the final few minutes where Gary talked about a shot hitting the post and there was a check made, a couple of saves and so on. Other than that late flurry, it had become increasingly like Barcelona had run out of ways to actually break this wall down. And to come back to Lampard, he was obviously pivotal in the way they were controlling it from the sort of centre of that midfield 3 that was at the sharp end for Chelsea, and yeah, it was a dominant display. He got himself about and got himself fouled by Messi a few times on it, at good points to ease the pressure and let the ball get out. But yeah, I mean, it was a ridiculous performance in another way, of course, of how deep they were. But, they became increasingly, as each minute ticked over, increasingly looked confident that they could actually pull this off.
Yeah, to be fair, there was no playing between the lines. I know there was no lines to play between. I mean, even the concentration that it takes, I mean, especially to play with only 10, to protect, what was essentially a 1-goal lead, if you like, to play in that intimidating atmosphere. But then on top of all of that, you are playing against arguably, again, we've said it all along, probably the best team at playing in and around the penalty area at pace. The levels of concentration that must have taken from every player on that pitch must have been mentally exhausting by the end of the game.
Completely. But when you consider, like Gary said, they were without the 3 main centre-backs. This is just a proper kind of backs to the wall, all hands to the pump, anyone picking up a position that they are at least vaguely familiar with or might have covered at some point in a practice match. It was just a collective of, players, unheralded players in some respects, rising to the occasion. And kind of like nailing the brief that they were given. This is the only way I can say it. I'll go back. I mentioned Liverpool, but it's my own team. Like Liverpool did it in Munich in '81, where players like Richard Money and Colin Irwin, hold out against Bayern Munich. You do get these games every now and then that kind of defy gravity somewhat. And this is what Chelsea did that night. When you've got players playing out of position, your captain's got himself sent off. His centre-back partner has been withdrawn injured partway through the first half. The polarising David Luiz is unavailable. It defies gravity. So much of it makes no sense. And they are some of the greatest stories in football, is the ones that do not make sense. And still, remember the game, remember parts of the game, sat and watched the game, and still expected, come the 89th minute, that Torres wouldn't score that goal. Yet he does. Yes, he does.
It's obviously, again, brilliant touchline reporting, Gary. Great match summary. I suppose, the final, they go, they play Munich in the Allianz Arena. It doesn't get any easier, this run, to what is, the ultimate sort of prize in European club football. And equally that, that game could have been picked, as well as this one. But in terms of sort of, Chelsea's history, is it this second leg against Barcelona? Is this the definitive game in Chelsea's history so far?
Just a really good question, Stu. That's a really good question. I just want to say one thing about what Stevie was saying earlier about the unsung hero. One of the unsung heroes that game was Raul Morales, who we bought from we had signed from Liverpool, and throughout this competition, he's just a dog in midfield, wonderful player, and he got booked in the last minute of the semi-final, which meant he couldn't play in the final. But it was brilliant, and they were all outstanding. But yeah, to the finals, I don't know is the honest answer. I guess can I put them equal?
It's your club, it's your choice.
There were both games where we didn't play well. We were by far second best. But if you go to Barcelona, a 2-0 down with 10 men, and get a draw, 2-0 down with 10 men away to Barcelona and get a draw, and then go to the Allianz against Bayern, who had put Real Madrid out in the semis on penalties, and in their own backyard, Bayern had the fans had a banner saying "Our city, our stadium, our cup." Chelsea, I had a T-shirt with it, and just went, "Your stadium, your city, your stadium, our cup." But it was the final was an amazing game, and it was 0-0 for so long, and then Bayern with so many chances, so crazy many chances, and then Muller scored with 6 or 7 minutes left to go, and you're thinking, the heart's gone. You're never going to score. And then once Drogba equalised, you're thinking, this is just crazy. This is just stupid. But yeah, so I think I put them equal. But although Martin Tyler did actually say when Drogba rolled that penalty in, and I've got a picture of it in the house that the kids brought me of it in pride of place in the apartment here. And Martin Tyler says the greatest night in the history of Chelsea Football Club. I ain't going to argue Martin disposal, man.
I'm going to come to you in a second, Aidan, and with another equally sort of difficult question, and where certainly the Barcelona performance, where that ranks in terms of English club sides in Europe. But before to that, it's actually a point worth making, Stephen. It's very not rare, but if you look at the history of the game and the history of the European Cup, it's very rare that finalists make it to finals in their home ground. Obviously, Liverpool go to Rome and do exactly what, not quite so dramatic circumstance, but they go to Rome and do exactly what Chelsea do to Bayern Munich.
Yep. You do get I always lament that they don't, have 3 stadiums selected at the start of a season. If you can, fans can adapt to get into places. I don't think the location of the final should be decided until, certainly in contemporary terms, I think you could wait until after the group stages, basically. You know, the group stages finish in December and say, well, look, you know, out of the 3 nominated grounds, this is where the final is going to take place. You know, I don't think there's any real excuse for anyone to have, you know, reach a European Cup final, Champions League final, whatever it is, and play it on home soil. You know, but you know, it happens, and but it doesn't always guarantee a victory.
You're right, it doesn't. But obviously now, to you, Aidan, you know, now we've sort of sent English clubs into the den, shall we say, and won European Cups there. But in terms of the performance that we've looked at tonight, you know, where does this rank in the terms of, you know, English side, certainly, and performances? You know, as we've said, 10 men against probably one of the greatest tactical managers, one of the greatest club sides of the time. 3 starting centre halves are missing. They're 2-0 down after barely half an hour. It's, you know, where does it sit?
Nice easy one. Yeah, thanks.
Well, you've had pretty easy, right? You've only talked about how good Barca are.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's way up there. I mean, I think the only comparable way you could say there's a semi-final and final that had sort of late drama and twists would be Man United in '99, the way they performed against Juventus in the semi-final, and then obviously what they did to Bayern, coincidentally, in the final that year to win. You know, Liverpool had their very, very dramatic 2005 victory, but I don't think the semi-final victory was quite as seismic. Yeah, it was quite fortunate, and yeah, Stephen said how far behind in the league Liverpool were compared to Chelsea that time around. I don't think that as an achievement quite sits on a par with this one in terms of the semi-final. In the final, possibly so, but not the semi-final and the final together. So yeah, I know. I can't put a number on it. Let's leave it at that. I can't put a number on it, but it's way up there. That's the only comparable one I can really think of in terms of the semi and the final having these big turnarounds to some extent, or sort of against the odds, or you know, achieving slightly beyond what might have seemed possible. And you talk about sense of destiny with, you say, John Terry's destiny was maybe not to be there when any of this happened. I think for Drogba in the final, am I right in thinking he was leaving Chelsea after the Champions League final? Yeah. So for him to score last gasp winner, I think he'd been sent off the previous time they were in a final, in Champions League final. So it was coming full circle for him. And then, of course, when he stepped up for the last penalty, did anybody doubt he was going to score? Because I certainly didn't. You know, that was written in the stars there. It's one of the most dramatic achievements in terms of winning a European Cup, even if the final itself was less dramatic than, say, Man United or Liverpool's victories that I mentioned there. But you know, the overall accomplishment is one of the finest, certainly.
I'm gonna ask you one more question, guys. I'm gonna finish with one more question. Obviously, you know, like I say, this has been a cup trilogy. It is kind of related, so bear with me. But you know, at the moment, you know, we talk about, and I know you've done it on a couple of the recent podcasts that you've done, Aidan, and you know, looking at how leagues are now, and how leagues seem almost like not processions, but it's the same names. It's very repetitive. Are we on the verge of potentially European Super League? But in terms of cup football and knockout football, which do you think is the greatest cup competition? You can have that.
Jeez, took a hospital pass.
It was too long to type in the messages.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I guess. Okay. So okay. Let's look at it in different criteria. In terms of prestige, the Champions League / European Cup, whatever format it was in, is the premier club competition in Europe. So by definition, that must count for something. You're not going to get so many upsets as you might get in the domestic cup competition. So it's different in those sort of terms. But because the rewards and the potential failures are so massively different, that you know, you're a hero or a zero in these sort of competitions. I mean, just look quite recently at Barcelona. Look recently at Real Madrid are getting slated mercilessly over here now for losing to against Man City. I think almost so, therefore, by definition, the prestige of the European Cup / Champions League probably is the greatest cup competition, unless you're going to throw in the World Cup as well, but that's countries rather than clubs.
Yeah.
But I just think it's because it's the value of it, it's the prestige of it, it's the importance of it, it's what it means. You know, you can be, if you win the FA Cup, you won the FA Cup. You're not champions of your country unless you win the league. If you win the European Cup, you are champions of Europe. A bit like, you know, like Liverpool, they're champions of the solar system at the moment. I think they've won so many things that unless there's a team on Jupiter somewhere that's going to throw them a challenge, I think they're probably, you know, champions of the solar system. But you know, I think that's probably, it's because it's the prestige does make a difference as well. Adds extra value.
It's a good answer by you, Gary.
Thank you, brother.
That's all right. The other two got to follow that.
Yeah,
Stephen,
well,
your thoughts?
I'm used to you, Stu.
No, I agree with Gary there. You know, I think for me, yeah, it's champions of Europe. You know, if you're the champions of Europe, you know you've risen to something that is very difficult to do. No matter which format you want to look at, you know, the current day format, you know, as it was. I think the European Cup had such a knife edge to it. It was a case of skin. You know, you would skim it across thin ice. You know, you one false move and you could be out. You know, you had to win your domestic title to gain entry to it. So if you face planted in the first round of the European Cup, then you know back to you know the drawing board meant go and win that league title again. That was your preliminary round. That was your qualification for getting there in the first place. You know, there was such a, you know, never ever been an era of such fine lines of success and failure than that version of the tournament. But the Champions League's still another one because there's so many extra teams in there. You know, such a more difficult landscape to plot a way through, easier to get into. You know, the modern day Champions League is an amalgamation of the European Cup as was and the UEFA Cup. You know, it's the two tournaments drawn together, and yeah, that path to European glory, to be the champions of Europe, it's still the pinnacle at club level.
Aidan, for you, same answer?
Sort of. So I'll throw a few other little quirks into the mix because obviously Gary and Stephen get to speak from the perspective of someone who has vested interest in this competition.
We also win Shields Trophy, don't we?
Exactly. It's been a while since I had any vested interest in top-level European competition. But what I would entirely agree is from, say, the quarterfinals onwards, it is, you know, there's some absolutely epic encounters. It is probably the highest quality football on a consistent level that you're going to get to see. The two-legged nature, I know it's been slightly different this season. The two-legged nature of it has actually, whereas in some cases that can diminish things slightly, I think in the latter stages of the Champions League it actually enhances it and makes it truly epic. And some of the way things have been set up for second legs, as we've talked about tonight and in various other occasions, like what Liverpool did to Barcelona last year, or Tottenham and Ajax last season as well. Absolutely epic. And from that stage on, I think, yes, it is the finest, but that's only the last few games to me. The rest of it is dire. I have zero interest in the group stages of the Champions League, speaking as a neutral. It's eminently predictable. There's no sense of jeopardy whatsoever. You know, the rich will win through, and if they don't, they'll end up in the competition below as a safety net. So I would say the first half of the whole competition is, I don't want to say meaningless, because, you know, it's still games getting played and teams do slip up, and it determines what comes in the knockout stages in terms of who you're facing. But it's so predictable as to make it a bit dull to the neutral. whereas the latter stages are anything but, and to a neutral, they are hugely enticing and very entertaining. To me personally, and I know Gary said we're not throwing the World Cup in there, but I will throw the World Cup in there. To me, as someone who loves the international tournaments, possibly more so than the domestic game for my own interests, rather than taking a neutral interest, which I do in the likes of these games we've been talking about here in the latter stages of these elite competitions. I find those the most absorbing. I find that the single game nature of the knockouts there, or even the group stages there, are almost jeopardy. At least they are in the current format. We'll see what happens in the future when they manage to kill that golden goose. But as things are in the current format, you lose one game and you're up against it in the group from the off, whereas the Champions League, you've got 6 games and the best will win through. The knockouts there, just being one game, it can go horribly wrong, and 4 years worth of dreams and hopes of an entire nation are gone. I find that more enticing as a competition than the Champions League. However, the latter stages of the Champions League do produce, I would quite agree, the best quality and some of the most dramatic moments without question. But lots of the Champions League is deathly dull.
Brilliant. I knew you wouldn't let us down, guys. Great answer, you see. It was a good question. It was all right. Nothing to fear. Guys, as always, it's been brilliant. Another trilogy of episodes has sort of been and gone. Clearly we've now got room for another trilogy if anybody wants to throw anything out there. Oh. Okay. Yeah, like I say, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's always great to watch games retrospectively. The games you guys have chosen, have been wonderful games for a whole host of reasons, and hopefully it's brought back some memories for people who are watching us. But yeah, as always, it's been great for me. I just get to watch football and ask questions. It's a perfect job, So yeah, as always, thanks very much, Gary. Excellent by you tonight. Pitch side, well done.
Thank you very much indeed. Enjoyed talking about that game. I think it is the most ridiculous game I've ever seen in my life. I just do. I just think it is.
Aidan, thank you for being on my side and not really having much in the way of cups or any success, really, to talk about while these two guys below us chat about, well, just the boredom that is winning trophies and dominating Europe and all those things we never want to do, really, do we?
It must be so tedious.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to do a job, and somebody's got to do it.
League One is where it's at apparently next season. That's apparently where it's all happening. Stephen, obviously, lots of experience, shall we say, of how to win competitions in a whole host of different ways. As a Liverpool fan, I think Liverpool have got an example for every which way of winning pretty much any trophy you want, apart from the Cup Winners' Cup.
Yeah, you've always there's a litany of scurry ways with which to succeed.
So we'll call it a day there, guys. Like I say, thanks for joining us, and obviously thanks everyone for watching. And please join us again for the next trilogy. See you later.